Hello, everyone. Today we have a short essay called Causality versus Duty. As always, James and Don are here to discuss. Um, this session will, contrary to the last ones, be 1 hour long. So we're going to go over it pretty quickly. So, James, Don, I was wondering if we could discuss a little bit on a little bit on the motivation. Why should one read this essay if one is doubtful of going over it?
Well, I think it's one of her most important because you can think about a lot of what she's doing in ethics is focused on sort of who should benefit, right? Is it the self versus others? And then you can think of others as the content, like how do you benefit yourself? And this really goes even deeper to what even is morality about. And she's contrasting two basic views of morality. One is much more the conventional view that morality are these duties that we have to obey. And her argument is that no, that's not what morality is. These duties don't exist. And to the extent that you see morality through the prism of duty, you destroy any possibility of happiness. And indeed, you destroy any possibility of morality. So she's sketching out at a deep level how even to think about what the subject of morality is, let alone what the specific principles or content of the subject is.
I think everyone is aware that on an implicit level, that sometimes morality requires us to do the difficult. It's not always easy to have integrity. She depicts it in her novels very well. Take, for example, Francisco d'Anconia having to decide whether to join Galt on strike. Ayn Rand depicts that as a tormented moment for one of her great heroes. She's sometimes accused of having a simple-minded approach to literature, that her characters never face difficult moral dilemmas. That is false. What Ayn Rand is saying here is that duty, nonetheless, has no place in ethics as a concept, even though we have to have our heads set to the long term, that sometimes we have to pay, and this is the way I put it, and she puts it herself many times, sometimes we have to pay, when required, the appropriate price for our highest values. Now, our values are oriented to our lives, our well-being, a very specific, concrete goal that ethics has, and it is an earthly goal. Any other approach to ethics, whether it's a religious approach that says obey God, or still worse, the Kantian approach that says do it simply because it fulfills the abstract conditions of what morality requires, all of that is wrong. It's about life on earth, even the difficult long-term decisions.
Thank you. So let's start from the beginning. And I think one of the basic and starting points is trying to grapple with the concept of duty that she's working with and differentiate with another concept that she will say that it's more valid than the one of duty, which is obligation. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, her starting claim that she's going to expand on is that duty is what she calls an anti-concept. And if you think about concepts as tools, anti-concepts are weapons. They're weapons designed in order to eliminate from usage crucial concepts that we actually need and replace them with unnecessary concepts that don't actually clarify anything. And so her view is that like obligation is a really important concept. And she's going to go on to explain that like if one of the most crucial things is that you need to be very scrupulous about what obligations you undertake because you have to be committed to fulfilling them. Whereas duty is something very different. Duties are things, dictates that you have to obey from some authority, and there's no reason why you should have to obey them. There's no personal stake. It's not an argument that's convinced you. It's not something that you personally stand to gain from listening or not listening. It's the idea ultimately that somebody said something and therefore you have to submit. And so the kind of starting point is her view is if this is how you view morality, and it can be very tempting because if you think that moral rules arise let's say, because they achieve some certain end. Like we develop certain conceptions in a culture about, well, honesty is the best policy because you'll lose customers if you don't tell the truth and you try to cheat them. And if you think about rules like this arising for certain reasons, but then if they're taught not as this is a means to an end, but just, mom and dad say, don't lie, don't have sex before marriage. They just start kind of issuing these commandments with no explanation. Then it's very easy to view the whole moral realm as somebody chiding you and saying, no, don't do what you want to do. And so it's in a way natural that morality comes to be natural is not the right word, but it's not surprising that morality comes to be viewed as a series of duties. And then you get thinkers who basically say, yeah, that's exactly what morality is and ought to be. And in particular, Ayn Rand thinks that this is what Kant is doing, that he's stripping from morality any personal stake of reward and punishment and just saying, no, you should act purely from the idea that I'm going to obey duty because it's a duty. I'm not going to ask what sort of positive is going to come from me. I'm not going to ask what sort of negative. I'm not going to ask about the consequences at all. I'm just going to do my duty. And that's what she's going to take the completely other side of the coin and say, like, no, it's all about what you personally have at stake in life. That's what we need morality for.
Yeah. The universal ethics that applies to all of us because we're human beings and because survival has certain conditions. We're doing it in order to live. Now, there are also moral obligations still that are not universal that apply individually. Take, for example, my being a ballet dancer. That would take a lot of work. There'd be a lot of musts, obligations. I'd have to practice every day. I might not ever be physically the best at it. Is it worth it to me to be a ballet dancer with all of the obligations that would imply? No. As a human being, I have to be honest. I have to have integrity and rationality if I want to live. Life is the goal here. What Kant does is he severs any possibility. You see why Rand so regards him as the very opposite of her thinking. He severs at the root the connection between life and morality, between consequences, indeed, of any kind. That's what this fancy word deontology means. The ontological approach to ethics is Kant's view that consequences of any kind don't matter. So to him, whether it happens to result in a selfish benefit to you or happens to be a totally self-sacrificial self-destruction is really irrelevant. You're really just fulfilling the abstract conditions of what makes something moral. One of them is maybe a valid one, universalizability for that universal part. But ethics doesn't stop there. It would still be moral for me to be an attorney, me, Jim Valliant, as opposed to being a ballet dancer, let's say. And that my goals present me with certain musts, certain obligations, because they're my goals for my life. You divorce life from values, and you've severed at the root any possibility of an objective ethics.
One of the things that probably I'm not completely clear about my reading here, and it's related to some questions that we're having, is this article criticizing all versions of duty or just the Kantian version? And there's a paragraph that says something like, I can't remember quite completely, but it says something like, this version of duty of Kant is truly awful. But is she criticizing all duty in this essay, or is there any different approaches of duty than Kant's?
Well, I mean, you can certainly think that, well, there's certain thinkers who will use duty to mean, in effect, what she means by obligation. So there can certainly be that. But there's what she's criticizing is any form of authoritarian ethics, any idea of a should that isn't rooted in your choice. So the way that she puts it is that all morality is an issue of you must if, and it's the if is a goal that you volitionally choose to embrace or not. So it's her view is not even that that one must act in ways that promote one's survival. Her view is, if you want to live, then you need to choose a whole constellation of values and virtues, thinking deeply about cause and effect and what will actually achieve your self-preservation. But you don't have to choose that. If not, nature will take its course, is the way that she puts it. So it's all rooted in your choice, and there's no authority telling you this is right and this is wrong. It's okay. Do you want to live? And if so, then reality presents certain conditions that are required in order to live. Those are not imposed on you. They're things that you willingly accept as the price of achieving your life. And so it, rather than ask, like, does she, is she only criticizing the Kantian version of duty? A better way to think about it is she's criticizing any idea that there's moral principles that are imposed upon you regardless of your own volition.
Exactly correct. If you think about standard religious ethics, for example, forget Kant for a second. Abraham was told by God to go kill his own son as a sacrifice. And it was a test, we're told, of obedience. Would Abraham be willing to sacrifice his highest value, because he waited all his life to have this son and he has a miraculous child? But God says kill him, and he's got to be willing to commit child murder, kill his own child. He has to act out of duty simply from obedience to God. Now, Christians would say you're doing it to get into heaven. In a sense, that's a conditional must. So in one sense, you can say that's at least there's some kind of outside egoism, even though in this world, everything that pertains to reality of this life, you're sacrificing. So if really what you're holding in mind is, I'm trying to get into heaven by doing all this, in a strict sense, you are doing what Ayn Rand is saying, following a form of causality over the duty. But where does that rule come from? The arbitrary command of God, which is sort of in itself a duty. And besides, the reward isn't even in this world. That's why Kant is even worse than a religious approach. It's not God, but obeying God is your duty, or even trying to get into heaven as your duty. You're, in Kant's view, it's much worse. You're simply fulfilling the abstract requirements of what it is to adhere to morality.
Yeah, notice the Christians. Well, but even notice the Christians, they'll throw out the to get into heaven, but that's not supposed to be your motivation, right? Like if you said,
right,
hey, I'm obeying God because I want to get into heaven, that's no, you're supposed to obey God because God is God, and this is what he told you to do. Parentheses, and it'll get you into heaven. But that's not why you're supposed to do it. And Kant is basically just stripping out that kind of disingenuousness and saying, no, like don't worry about a reward. You don't know there's going to be a reward. Now, I mean, it's more complicated than that because he, in effect, thinks you have to think in the back of your mind there's not a reward. Otherwise, you couldn't actually go on living a moral life. And so, in that sense, he falls back into exactly the kind of Christian pretense. But that ultimately, no, what he's concerned with is what he calls a goodwill, which is the desire to do your duty because it's your duty. And as with all things, it is more complicated than that. But that at the end is what it means to have a good motivation is not to have any personal motivation. It's to be purely motivated by taking orders. And that is, so, to put it mildly, so anathema to how Rand views things.
Right. And even, as Don points out, even in the Christian view, it's, as I said, the rules themselves are arbitrary. And really, even the reward in heaven is just a parenthesis. Self-love. Self-love is the ultimate sin in Christianity, as Augustine understood.
Isn't one of the criticisms I've heard about Rand is that she doesn't completely get Kant's point. And if I completely understand the criticism, is something like you say that if some people do something that it's aligned with his values, it cannot be considered moral. But at the same, what Kant really says is that there can be something that it's impound, but it can be a moral action if you act against your desire to making those values. And what Rand is saying is that only if you act not having those values, you will achieve those. You will be regarded as a moral person. So, for instance, if you want to eat because it's pleasurable for you, and you eat, then that's not a moral answer. It's not a moral motivation, or doesn't have a moral reward. But at the same time, if you're if you have if you're hungry, but at the same time you don't act because you don't eat because you're hungry, but it is your duty to be nourished, then you will be a moral person. Do you think that criticism that Rand doesn't get that point is correct? I don't know if I explained.
Yeah, I'm not clear on the point. I would say this. What you can definitely say is Rand's take on what Kant is saying in ethics. It's not like a non-standard take. I mean, Kant scholars debate a lot about him, and she's not trying to be a Kant scholar. And what she's focused on is kind of the essence of his viewpoint. So I think it's a fine discussion to go, does she get him exactly right? But I think the more interesting thing is like, all right, well, what is really the core of what she's saying? And so if you have a view, and part of what she's arguing here is that this, the Kantian approach, and it's wider than Kant, teaches you to be maniacally focused on is, am I getting moral credit? Am I getting moral credit? And what she's saying is, what you want to be focused on is, am I getting what I want out of life? Am I getting what I want out of life? Now, I think the more interesting question, or the harder thing to integrate, is her perspective that she outlines here, and then her analysis of pride, such as we see in Galt's speech. So here she's contrasting her view of you need to be focused on values and what's required to achieve them with the Kantian view of obsessing about the state of your moral character. And in Galt's speech, she says that there's no value higher than your moral character, and that this is going to be kind of a central focus of the virtue of pride, is how to attain a perfect character. So I think, to me, that is that's sort of a startling, I don't think it's a contradiction in the end, but to me, that's really a fascinating point. And I mean, we can talk about that more if you guys are interested. I'll just name one aspect of it. If you read her analysis of pride, it's so value oriented. It's that in order to gain and enjoy values, you have to live by morality and feel that you're worthy of the values you achieve. So it's, her focus is not on moral character as an end in itself and somebody giving you moral points and saying, good boy, you did it. It's causal. It's that if you want to get the blessings that morality has to offer, then you better damn well live by morality. And that, I think, is a really, it's just a very interesting, it's interesting to try to put all those different perspectives together.
I have spent endless hours and days over the years arguing with people who think that Ayn Rand was unfair to Immanuel Kant. And every single time it goes like this. Kant has no problem with certain egoistic behavior, certain selfish behavior. He says, go ahead, eat if you're hungry. And more than that, he's actually talking about certain conditions of ethics, some of which Ayn Rand may agree with, as I said earlier, universalizability. The worst thing about it, the fundamental thing that these critics aren't getting, is that Kant's deontological approach itself, as I said earlier, severs at the very root, at the very foundation, any connection between moral values and your life on earth. Any consequences are out. Like what Don says, it's a question of getting moral stars. You get little moral check marks, credit for being moral. Oh boy, isn't that lovely? Ayn Rand too says, yeah, morality can be tough. We have to develop our character. There's nothing more important. We're going for long-term goals that may require us to pay a high price if it's a high enough value. She has a whole different, though, approach to delayed gratification than most moralists. For her, it is all about life on earth, and only justified, if it can be justified, by life on earth. But the critics get her wrong, because just a little self-destruction can ruin your whole day. And Kant opens up the possibility that you must be willing to act as your own destroyer if that is what is required by morality, by the abstract conditions of what it is to be a moral person.
I mean, here's one thing that you can definitely say. What you can say is that Kant believes you can't know for sure that you're acting from a moral motive unless you're acting against your self-interest. So as James pointed out, there's plenty of cases in which he thinks those two probably align, right? Like he's not his view is not like any value you have, surrender it. It's that, no, don't be concerned with values, be concerned with the rules. But how do you know when you're really motivated by the rules? And in those cases, the only way you can know is when you're acting against inclination. And so in his view, you're in a better situation from morality's perspective when every inclination leads you not to want to do the good and you do the good. And so then Rand's view is the complete opposite. And she's very Aristotelian in the sense, which is Aristotle's view is that what we're striving for is this kind of unity where not only do we do the good, but we want to do the good. That we've made it second nature. And the way that objectivists think about it is when we have a reason, emotional harmony, right? That's what we really want to be chasing after. And that goes back to her analysis of pride. Part of what pride is doing is putting you in such a situation that you both want to do what's good for you and you do what's good for you. And that you recognize that something is in your interest and you want to actually pursue your interests. So she's definitely getting something very fundamentally right about Kant. And she's definitely very much in an opposite way of approaching morality from Kant, whatever the details.
Right. Inclinations and fulfilling our inclinations is not a sign that we're immoral. It just tells us something about our inclinations, right? Kant says inclinations, bad, bad, bad. We got to get our inclinations and the values that are pro-life working on the same side. We can do that. Well, the powerful thing here is that people say, why be moral? Ayn Rand has by far the most powerful answer. Your selfish benefit. The development of your character is for your selfish benefit. Well, your long-term selfish benefit, but for your selfish benefit. Anything else is just a do your duty because it's your duty.
Well, one thing that's so interesting is that, like, if you go back to the Greeks, and the Greeks basically all agree that, like, morality is about happiness. And they'll formulate, I mean, the translation obviously is an issue, but the morality is good for you in some sense. And so there's really no question until Christianity comes along about why be moral. And it's only when you have an authoritarian duty-based ethics that then it's, well, why the hell should you do this? And it becomes like a real issue. So it's, if you have a view that says morality is about achieving something that's positive for you, then there's no real question. Now, as James says, Ayn Rand has a real answer, but the whole reason that people are searching for an answer of why be moral, the whole reason that there's even a confusion about it is because we've had such a perverse, twisted view of morality that says, no, it's just you following these things that have nothing to do with what you have a personal stake in.
And that's the way we're taught ethics as children in many cases, especially from religious backgrounds. You're doing it because that's just the way God says to do it.
I think it's very interesting to know about that. So there are many other questions that I would like to ask about the duty side, but we're getting a little bit out of time. So I would like to go over the causality side. And Rand says that duty is contraposed to reality and also to morality. But I was wondering if we could comment a little bit on what her view on morality and reality is, the relationship between morality and reality that she has. And as well, maybe we could touch her view that morality not only answers a question of how, but also of for what, like final causation and efficient causation, which is something that she thinks that the other side doesn't have.
Yeah, exactly right. Whether it's religious based or Kantian based, it's not reality based. And as I said before, deontology, it severs the exact root between life and value, the only factual basis for ethics, for values. And only humans actually have the capacity for final causation, that is to say, to think in terms of purposes and goals in a self conscious way. So ethics pertains uniquely to humans, but it pertains to the fact that life is a conditional thing, that if we want life, there are certain conditional musts that go with that. She closely connects every aspect of her ethics to reality. You're being honest because you're committed to reality. You're being just because there's a difference between human moral character that makes a difference to you, and you've got to judge that accurately. To her, every single thing is reality based, has an end, a specific end that relates to your life. Any other ethics destroys that. You're not even looking at reality. You're asking God, you're asking, like Kant does, what are the abstract conditions of what it is to be moral? Your focus isn't on reality. Your focus is on something else, necessarily.
So, could we um, try to get some example of how one should act in a proper way and distinguish it against a dutiful way? I was thinking about an example, but I think it's not the best one to exemplify someone what we're trying to grapple. So, if you have a better one, um, please pitch it. But I was thinking about um, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. I don't know if you heard about the case. Um, so my understanding of the case is that she wants to emulate Steve Jobs, and she has this business idea of doing something with the blood in a very particular way. And according to recounts, she was more on the idea of fake it until you make it, instead of asking herself how she should uh, do things. And according to the recounts I've seen, she ended up more being like a cult like that denied and silenced some of the people who were saying like this is not the way that one should move forward, instead of trying to go over and try to grapple with things. I don't know if you have a better example of that.
Well, I mean, it's a really good, the whole Theranos example is a really meaty one for thinking about morality in general, in the sense of it's a good illustration of a lot of things, like don't have secondhanded motivations. Like I think the being inspired by Steve Jobs, but basically imitating him and trying to like make that your central focus, which she clearly did, isn't good. So I think there's a lot of lessons, including, yeah, like you should select goals that are reality based and like honesty and all that. I don't think it's a good contrast for thinking about duty necessarily, but I mean, one thing, and I have to go in about 10 minutes. I apologize, everybody. But one thing I will say is, so the way that Ayn Rand puts it here as a kind of catchphrase that is capturing her view is this idea: God said, "Take what you want and pay for it." But it's important to get that she fleshes that out a lot. That's a really helpful, eloquent way to capture this idea of you choose what you want and then you follow the causal principles to go after it. But she really stresses this idea, like so this is how she immediately follows that, which like we should really pay attention to. She says, The disciple of causation faces life without inexplicable chains, unchosen burdens, impossible demands, or supernatural threats. His metaphysical attitude and guiding moral principle can best be summed up by an old Spanish proverb: God said, take what you want and pay for it. But to know one's desires, their meaning, and their costs requires the highest human virtue, rationality. And there's a discussion here about, in effect, what it's not you get to pluck any old goal out of the ether and say, I want that and I'm willing to pay the price. Rather, her view is that there's a fundamental goal that one has to accept if you're entering the whole valuing realm, which is the choice to promote one's life. It's to seek as your ultimate value your own existence. And then it's that you have to choose a bunch of goals that cohere together towards that end. So there's choice involved at all of these fronts, but it's not just kind of arbitrarily picking things. You have your part of your causal thinking is, what are the different ends that can actually fit together and be achieved and in reality? And then it's okay, well, what are the means to achieving them? And part of that goes into picking kind of more specific goals. So I want to live. I need a career because human beings live by producing. Well, what kind of careers could I choose? Well, I could be an entrepreneur. I could be a lawyer. I could do whatever the hell Don Watkins does. Okay, like could I be a drug dealer? Oh, well, no, that's actually going to clash with other things. So maybe I want to be a lawyer. Well, what are the means to do that? And is the price worth it? And so there's what she's laying out is that to take what you want, there's a lot of thinking that goes into, well, what should I want? And should doesn't mean what does some authority say, but what are the kinds of things that are actually achievable, actually good for me in the full context of all of the things I'm going to pursue. And part of what you're doing in order to answer these questions is formulating a whole hierarchy of values. And so she doesn't go into the kind of details of how this process works, but that it's a complex process. And I forget exactly what the Theranos thing, but there part of what you get is somebody's motivated by second-handerism. They're pursuing a goal of, well, I want to be the next Steve Jobs, without thinking about how it integrates with anything else, including, can I actually build a product that's going to be world-changing? And then that completely ignores all of the causal principles necessary to achieve it, such as like being an honest person who doesn't go to jail. And so in that sense, there's a lot to learn from that, from morality, but there's no duty contrast to it exactly. Unless, she just thought God's telling me be Steve Jobs, but that, to my knowledge, that was not the motivation.
That was a great answer.
So we have a question from Stephen. He says, is there some validity in the notion of a duty to oneself? Rand says in the last page of the essay that a personal promise or agreement is the only valid binding obligation, and that one must assume full responsibility for one's choices and actions. Do James and Don conceptualize themselves as having and fulfilling strict responsibilities, obligations, or promises to themselves, in quotes, as they navigate in life? Does this way of thinking show up in their day-to-day lives? And if so, does it help?
Well, I mean, the key word that is there, and she stresses it a couple times in the essay beyond what you've quoted, is a sense of responsibility. And responsibility, the funny part is, in other contexts, she'll react negatively to the term, usually when it's used as like an altruistic responsibility trying to be thrust upon her. But the sense of self-responsibility is crucial. Psychologically, it captures what a person who's concerned with their happiness is focused on, which is, it's not, I don't think in terms of, all right, I want to, become a successful writer, so I have an obligation to wake up every day and, obligation to myself to wake up every day and write. But I'm taking responsibility for achieving my goals. And so I'm going to get up every day and write, even if I don't feel like it. And it often depends on the context, which perspective is most useful. Sometimes you need to really keep it the forefront of your mind what my goal is. I need to remember that how great I'm going to feel when I have this book finished. Or I'm going to remember how great I'm going to look in a bathing suit if I follow this diet over the winter. Sometimes you want to be focused on the goal. Sometimes it's more psychologically useful to be focused on no, I got to stick with this. You want to remind yourself of kind of, I made a commitment, I'm going to follow through on this. So I made a commitment that in order to get that book done, I'm going to write every day, first hour every day. I think both perspectives are necessary, but you never want to lose the link between them. The reason I have this responsibility is because I want the goal. In order to have the goal, it implies certain responsibilities. So you need both. But sometimes to yourself, you want to emphasize one or the other, depending on what will most be fruitful in keeping you on the course that you've committed to.
Yeah, that's a good answer. It's relates back to what we were saying earlier about inclinations and getting our emotions on the same side. Most of the time, I don't have to say, this is my duty. I don't need a concept even like responsibility. I've gotten my emotions so aligned with me that any such concept is really an additional thing for 90% of the time. Oh no, I want to be honest. I want to be productive. I enjoy the work I do. I get up out of bed and I think, oh, how exciting my day is going to be. Since I've got my emotions aligned with my pro-life values, to me, I need no such concept most of the time. Where that responsibility concept of any kind kicks in is where I've got tough decision making, where I have a high value and maybe not so high a value, and Francisco deciding to go on strike, tormented in bed with Dagny. That's when I need a concept that commits me to my long-term values. And that's the only sense in which I'd even use the concept responsibility. This is a tough value judgment. This is where my highest long-term interest actually lies. And there's a competing interest, something I value a lot. So I've got to bear in mind, whereas if say it's getting up and doing my workout in the morning. Yeah, okay, that's tough. But I do what Don says. I think about how much healthier I'm going to be, my longevity, how much better I'm going to look. So I can orient my emotions such that doing the workout in the morning is actually, I'm overcoming that resistance to do the workout. So I overcome the resistance by thinking of what my actual long-term values are. That normally aligns it for me. Okay, I'll get up and I'm going to run. But there are times that are tougher than that. There are times like Francisco, where he has some too high values and he is tormented about what the correct long-term approach is.
Thank you. So,
all right, guys, I have to bow out. I will see you all next week.
Thank you,
Don. So I was trying to get to one of the last things that she talks about is that one of the consequences of seeing morality as a product of efficient causation is that one grabs the concept of responsibility. If one doesn't have, if one grabs the other concept of duty, one changes that responsibility for obedience. And I was thinking that, do you think that the way in which Freudianism has been interpreted, like the phenomenon that Freudianism has observed of these two elements of people wanting to do something, which is the id controls the two parts, but so the super id is the one that is on duty, that has to perform the duties, and the other one, I don't know the name in English, but
the super ego is this concept of conscience. The ego is our conscious self, and the id are these subconscious, unconscious desires that we all have.
Do you think that that phenomenon of having a split personality could be an effect of seeing the world in this view, even if Freudianism
Oh,
is
that's
incorrect.
terrific. I have to say, for all and I do, there are reasons why I think Freud did advance human understanding, in the field of psychology, developing, even just opening a field of psychology. He just deserves some credit. With that proviso, that is an institutionalization of the very dichotomy that Ayn Rand would oppose. Our desires are not some inexplicable voice from our body just kicking us like an instinct. They themselves are shaped by our thinking. Our emotions themselves are shaped by our thinking. We ourselves can have an impact on our emotions. We ourselves can get our emotions aligned with our highest values. There need be no conflict. But first of all, it's not our emotions are not necessarily innate, but the result of value judgments. So let's start with his poor conception of the id. And then you've got the super ego here, this conscience, this voice of dad or God or something, which is subconsciously telling us to do our duty. Those two things can't align. And it's that conflict, Freud says, that we're trying to resolve. Oof, that institutionalizes a reason-emotion dichotomy that necessarily says that our inclinations are over here and what we should do is over here. All these guys, most of these guys, are sort of modern thinkers like that, are sort of assuming that the duties of morality can't really be aligned with your self-interest. And here is where Ayn Rand's point kicks in. We wouldn't need a concept like duty, or go back even to your responsibility. What's a moral responsibility except the acknowledgement of cause and effect? Properly understood, the whole concept of moral responsibility is simply a recognition of, if this is what you want, this is what you got to do to get it. So if I were to say, you have a responsibility to eat breakfast and enjoy your breakfast, it sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? Well, most of the time, that's the way ethics is. Ethics is about living, surviving, enjoying your life, succeeding. It's not a conflict built in between doing what's right and succeeding in life, sort of an assumption that religious ethics and Kantian ethics has built into our minds.
Another thing that I observe all the time, mainly because of um, my area of expertise, that is also related to the denial of efficient causation in morality is um, all political issues, but more precisely those related to economics. And the most obvious one is minimum wage. Like people say, well, it's desirable that people earn more, then raise the wage. Uh, and it's different if one would ask oneself, how should one raise wages, right? Because there's a way in which one can ask these kind of things and and have questions and de facto raise wages. But to just say, well, that's what it should be. It's
An arbitrary assumption. Why not make the minimum wage, £100,000 a year for everybody? Obviously, it's the economy which has really got to be, determining these things. The market has to determine these things. It can't be objective outside of a market, even socially objective outside of a market, because there the conditions of reality are all factored in, all get kicked in. Religion has conditioned us all to believe that morality has nothing to do with efficient causes kicking in at some point. Oh, you mean this is for that? And this is for that? And we got to do this if we want this and that? That's not the way people think about ethics. They think about ethics in just the opposite way. And it will result in whether it's economics or public policy or ethics in general. Every normative question will be polluted. Every normative question will be polluted by a distinction, a dichotomy between our needs, the needs of life on earth, and what the demands of morality consist of.
and
So if you're a socialist and you think, wow, poverty is a horrible thing we have to eliminate, you'll be blind to any other higher values which might even get in the way.
yes, and in this concept, in this context, do you think that the Enlightenment was about to defy this kind of thinking? And I'm talking specifically in the context of Adam Smith, because Adam Smith is writing in the context of, well, why our country is rich? What are the conditions of becoming wealthy? Um, do in, do you think that in other fields and in other areas the same was happening, and maybe in philosophy as such, the
Well,
the, the defiance of um,
consider the medieval mentality. It would have been alien to, they would never have understood the wealth of nations. Why should nations be rich? Friar Savonarola in Florence would say, it's evil that the Medicis are getting rich in Renaissance Italy. Bad thing, rich is bad. That is obviously a perversely anti-life approach that you can only get away with by divorcing moral values from the needs and conditions of life on earth. Adam Smith was an Enlightenment thinker, but still confused. There is a growing Aristotelian attitude that life on earth is what it's about, but it's an implicit one that's growing in the Enlightenment. It lacks what it severely needed was Ayn Rand's explicit egoism. So you'll get expressions of implicit egoism during the Enlightenment. But still, Adam Smith, isn't it a wonderful thing? Adam Smith will observe how the free market works to improve everybody, or at least the general well-being, even though what it's doing is freeing individuals to pursue their own private interest. What a reality basis that is, that's superior to any medieval understanding. He wants the nations to know what makes them rich and why, but he really hasn't grappled with the more basic moral issue here at play. That's why there's the paradoxical hand is still invisible to poor Adam Smith.
And well, thank you. I think one of the last things that I wanted to analyze on the effects is the existentialist movement, which, in my understanding, I'm no philosopher, they try to deny some parts of what philosophy was in that time, and one of their core answers is that they say that since there's no God, there's no duty, and since there's no duty, there's no purpose. But wouldn't you think that that's the exact, the complete opposite that one should conclude from that?
Absolutely.
And
Sorry,
what do you think about this Camus attitude of saying, well, you have to stand up, be like Sisyphus, take the things as they are, and just do what you have to do, and there's no gain. That's it.
It is truly evil. And I'm going to say this just like that. It is truly evil that religion, and that's what it's attempting to do, manipulate people to do what they want, what they think is the appropriate behavior, by telling them that their life on earth is something to be tossed out, is irrelevant. Kant goes so far as says morality has nothing to do with that, whatever. Having been so conditioned, the entire existentialist movement, you could maybe begin with Dostoevsky. Without God, why be moral? Dostoevsky asks. They are so conditioned. Our modern mind is so conditioned that if we don't have God or some voice from the noumenal world, we don't have ethics at all. There's no objective ethics. It goes earlier than that. Hume, what are moral values? It really boils down to feelings. That's really what Kant himself is trying to respond to. You mean Hume is just saying it's all a question of emotions? Well, no, Kant says sometimes to be moral, in fact, the essence of being moral is acting against our inclinations. None of these guys even questions the idea that moral duty is going to come at the cost of your interest, Alejandro. You will have to suffer to be moral in one way or another, and that is really the test of morality, is how much you're willing to suffer for morality. the way they put it, for example, when a soldier dies for his country, what he gave the ultimate sacrifice. From the objectivist standpoint, no, he paid the appropriate price for one of his top values. Does that answer your question? I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. So we're about to get to the hour that we promised. I was wondering if you could get some final remarks and probably them like say what is the achievement in this essay and what is the what if one reads this essay, one in which ways can one improve his own life?
They are infinite. They range from the Christian who still believes that self-love is the essence of evil to the public policymakers you were talking about. By divorcing causality from ethics, they can get people to do just about anything. Look at what Hitler got people to do in Germany by obeying a duty-based ethics that had nothing to do with the values of life on Earth. What Ayn Rand is out to destroy is this notion that morality has to do with obedience to something outside of the needs of your life, something that has nothing to do with the conditions of human life on Earth. They're asking you to use some kind of outside voice of authority, whether it's God, the noumenal world, the abstract conditions of ethics. Ayn Rand wants to stomp that out of existence. The entire concept that morality is somehow swallowing my interests and doing what's right. No, 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 no. Sometimes morality does require us to pay a high price, but we're paying a high price for a high value.
Thank you, James.
Sure.
So, with that in mind, I thank everyone who went through this essay today with us. Next week, we will be discussing at 6:30. Doesn't life require compromise? And if you like this kind of discussions and belong to this community, I please become a member. You can get to the membership at aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership. There are a lot of perks associated with your membership. You get value for value. I recommend to you to get into that. So thank you very much, James and Don, that was here for 40 minutes. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Take care.